Grades and wage labor. Note, this was written a little bit ago. Finals didn't give me much of a chance to do YouTube stuff. This last week I have had a lot of physics homework on a subject I had little prior experience in, quantum mechanics. I would like to spend more time going over the textbook and my notes trying to make sure I fully understand the subject. It's very important not to move too quickly through this because learning physics involves taking a basic set of understandings and relating them to each other and experiments. If we misunderstand one aspect, one relation, or one experiment, we may have an incorrect understanding. Due to the progression of knowledge in physics, a kink could easily turn into a major problem down the line, possibly stunting my growth as a physicist. This isn't just about memorizing equations or learning how to problem solve, but actually about a deep understanding of the concepts involved. A possible picture of quantum mechanics is that we are just unable to accurately measure where something is with our tools. And that's where the probabilistic nature of particle physics comes from, not some intrinsic property of the particles. This is a fundamentally incorrect view, but using this and just applying equations could get me through more than enough of the class to pass, even though this view could really hurt my chances of accurately applying my understanding of physics enough to do useful research. I do not have enough time to focus on preventing this because I am actively trying to keep my grades up. Do I get all my other assignments done, or spend hours playing with each problem until I understand all aspects of it? I don't have the money to repeat any school, and even if I did, there are better uses. So one incentive is to get good grades so that I'm able to save money.
This means while that system, especially in the short term, incentivizes you to get good grades, only you incentivize understanding. This leads back to a choice. What mix of grades and understandings do I want? It is a zero-sum game. On top of that, the system is designed with that understanding already in mind. It is essentially impossible to go with all understanding even if I wanted to. If I am to understand everything, I will simply take more time than my class allows to complete it. The other day, my teacher recommended an entire textbook as further reading into a subject, a week before finals. Fourier transforms if anyone cares. I did not get to read this textbook before my final. I had other classes and subjects in that class to prepare for. Luckily, the professor knew this would happen, and so he provided the form of the equations on the test. I was able to work with them because of that, but I still had no idea what I was doing in the grand scheme of things. For another final, it was open book, open note. The entire point was to have the answers I would already need written down and organized before the test began. Part of the entire point was that there was no time to work out or look up the problems if I did not know it off the top of my head. This is actually very common in physics. Already knowing the answer is heavily prioritized over the ability to find an answer. This heavily favors bulk memorization over general problem solving. This means one thing. I have two competing systems of short and long-term incentives. One is through measurement of my skills, and one comes from my need to succeed in my field. Education is a form of labor. It, however, is not the wage labor we encounter every day. The same situation does apply itself here, just a little more subtly. Just like how our education system can be reduced down to how we measure learning, the wage labor system can be reduced down to how we measure labor. Labor in general is simply things that need to be done, like building a good bridge or cooking some food. In this system, on a societal level, labor is measured as profit. Profit is simply allocating resources to organizational structures that need to do the labor. The goal is that through allocating resources to the organizational structures that do labor, we get all the labor done that needs to get done. This shows that how profit is supposed to be a measurement of what an organizational structure does. Just like memorization and understanding, we are only measuring something similar to labor. In actuality, we are measuring dependence on the organizational structure to do the labor it does. Supply and demand. The more of something there is, and the less we need it, the less dependent on it we are, and the less we tend to pay. And the problem here is that the more areas we move into measuring labor, the more incentive there is to work against labor. This is because dependence, like memorization, is not a two-way relationship with what we are actually trying to measure. We need some level of memorization of a topic to understand it. We need to give resource structures we depend on to do labor. The problem is, we do not need to understand to memorize, and we do not need useful labor to be done in order to depend on something. One way to increase reliance on labor is to create a situation where more labor needs to be done. When an organizational structure is allocated more resources, it expands. This expansion allows it to be a larger amount of what we depend on. This means that while our measurement system of labor actually creates a situation where doing less labor gives the organizational structure more power for when they do labor. How many diamonds are going to be hoarded, and how many are going to be drip fed to couples? Lab-made diamonds are better anyways, yet the monopoly still holds. People all throughout history cooked food and built bridges, and while the specifics change, it's typically because they need to do it to survive. Nowadays, this need to survive is abstracted. The workers need to do it in order to get the wage, which is what entitles them to survival. The payment of these wages is treated like profit on an individual scale. You rent out your personal means of production to somewhere that rents out the combined means of production through selling things they have produced. Profit is simply the difference between these two payments. This means that the goal of a worker is to be seen by the organizational structure as something it needs to depend on to continue to exist. The difference here is that while an organizational structure can shift or even stop existing if that's in its best interests, a worker is unable to. The worker depends on being depended on to exist. This means that the relationship here is closer to two-way, and so the relationship as capital sees it is not the same as what the worker sees. The worker sees the organizational system as measuring them simply as tools of production, assets if you will, and not the things that are doing the producing themselves. This means that their only measured impact is how they change the organizational structure of the company as a whole. The duality here is essentially a measurement of a person's impact on an organizational system to approximate the labor that needs to be done. To increase the accuracy of the measurements, a company must exert tighter control on the workers. Amazon measures how many seconds someone spends in the bathroom and stuff like that. To do labor, we need to measure change, but to measure change, we do not need to do labor. The final state of a company that creates little to nothing through extreme social control and absolute dependence is a monopoly. Look at all the internet companies here in the US, for example. They could easily provide much more, but by not doing the labor to provide more, they actually make more money. I spent a lot of time in the last month trying to get my ISP payment stuff fixed. The problem is, essentially everyone I talk to is a salesperson and not a technician. The control over them makes it so that even if they want to help me, they cannot. This is a complete breakdown of the measurement. It is as if I only memorized physics and never learned a thing. That's basically what learning a language is, though, so who knows how accurate this comparison is. Hope you all enjoyed. Tell me what you think.